Hey, Seth David here, and I want to talk to you about the difference between compliance and bulletproof. In the write up here that I've given you, I've gone into a bit of detail. I figure I'll give you the sort of short version of all of this in a video. When I started Nerd Enterprises, which was back in 2003, I remember that my wife would sometimes ask me how all these companies would come in my door and their books were a mess. How did it get to that point? And at first I'd say, don't worry, this is paying our bills. It's good. And then, of course, I'd go on and explain that a lot of these people who start their own businesses aren't accountants. And because she would recall that when I sat down to start Nerd Enterprises, I would spend hours with spreadsheets because I was coming off of a full-time job, and I would want to look at how many hours can I bill and at what rate can I charge, and I would want to be conservative about it, meaning, use a low rate that I know I can easily get. And I was so worried that I was going to be able to make enough money to pay the bills. And I spent hours building out these spreadsheets, and she said, doesn't everybody do that when they start a business? And I said, well, no, not everybody has those accounting skills. People who start businesses start them for all kinds of reasons, the most basic of which are, I've got something I'm really good at doing. I love doing it. I don't want to work for somebody else. I want the freedom. I want the unlimited income earning potential. Lots of reasons I've learned later on, not all of them so great, why people want to start their own business. So what happens, right? You get somebody who doesn't really have an accounting background, and they're just starting out. They can't really afford to hire somebody, so they have to kind of figure it out themselves. They're not going to do the sophisticated spreadsheet planning, although I've given you an example in a screenshot here, and you can click on that and link over and just make a copy of that template and play with it. All you want, yours for the taking. It's free. But, so you're not going to do all that if you don't have the experience to know how to do all that. You might do some planning. You'll sit down and say, well, I can get so much revenue per month by selling so many units of my product or getting on so many clients for my service and what I charge per month, whatever it is. You can do the basic planning that spreadsheet accomplishes. But the bottom line is the people who would come in our door didn't have the accounting background. If they did it at all, they had to figure it out for themselves. And the reason they're coming to me when they are in most cases is they've now acknowledged the need. They recognize I have to do this, right? And so the difference between compliance and bulletproof really is compliance is, it's like quote, good enough, unquote, right? Which often translates in the real world to, I can get a tax return done with these books. And I gave the example in the write-up, I'll give it again here, where I can tell you so many versions of this story based on clients that have come in my door over the years that they come and say, my books are fine, I just need somebody to keep them up. And I say, great, let's take a look. And we look at the balance sheet, and I'll start reviewing the bank accounts, and the bank accounts may be all reconciled fine. A lot of people understand at least that much. It's surprising to me how many people are surprised when I tell them you also have to reconcile credit cards, but again, if you're not an accountant, it may not be that obvious. But then I'll get to things like accounts receivable, and I'll run the aging report, and I'll show that to my business owner client or prospect, and they'll point things out and say, oh no, I know that was paid. There's no way they would owe us that money. And this is where the trouble begins, and this is where we have to get from compliance to bulletproof, because here's what typically happens in these cases is the invoices were paid, and somebody recorded the payment that came in as a deposit, and it went straight to income. Now here's the core difference, one example of a core difference between compliance and bulletproof. Compliance-wise, this is actually okay, and I'll tell you why. Most small business owners are actually cash basis taxpayers. So on a cash basis, the only income that counts is the one that got recorded straight in a deposit to income, because that's money received. The invoice that payment actually should have applied to actually represents duplication of income, but that won't show up on a cash basis because it's an unpaid invoice, right? So we run our cash basis financials to get our taxes done. The unpaid invoice, the income from the unpaid invoice won't be included. So for tax purposes, that's fine. That's compliance. It's okay. It's right. There could be some errors. There could be some omissions, but by and large, probably for most people's purposes, no big deal. We can get the returns filed and we're comfortable. Most importantly, the enrolled agent or the CPA who's filing the returns is comfortable that these books are accurate enough to file the taxes with. The problem is on a bulletproof basis, that scenario is a disaster. I can't run a business because I don't know who's really paid me and who hasn't unless I go in and start finding and correcting these kinds of scenarios. And that's the difference. Bulletproof means truly on an accrual basis, which you can't run a business on a cash basis. Doesn't exist. That means I'm ignoring my receivables, which means I'm ignoring what people owe me. And it means I'm ignoring my payables, which means I'm ignoring what I need to pay out to others. And it leaves way too much out of the picture to be able to say that you can run any kind of a business on a cash basis. Cash basis is only for filing taxes. That's that. So the moral of the story is bulletproof means I can really rely on the numbers. When I run that receivables report, I know that those people really owe me that amount of money. If I picked any three of them at random and called them up and said, do you owe us this money according to your records, depending on how good their records are, they're going to either be able to confirm, yes, we do owe that money, or if there is a dispute, because we're bulletproof, we can provide the documentation that confirms abundantly that they do in fact owe us that money. And at worst case, with a little bit of back and forth, because their records maybe weren't so good, we can get them to confirm that they owe us that money. That's bulletproof. Bulletproof is a more familiar term that I'm really using to describe what I would call audit proof. It means come in, audit my books, I can prove every number, I'm good with it. So hopefully this clears up some questions people have, especially with the recent release of the Bulletproof Bookkeeping with QuickBooks Online course. A lot of people have been asking me, Seth, what does that really mean, bulletproof? Hopefully this helps answer that question.